Mildred, follow that car.
You got it!
I'm starting to think that we're the only two people in the whole state who have yet to make love in that car.
I think someone's shooting at us.
Why?
Because we're kissing. Someone always shoots at us when we're kissing.
Hello and welcome to 80s TV Ladies. I'm Susan Lambert-Haddam, and my favorite cars are my Kia Niro and my old college car, the 1980 Toyota Corolla wagon.
And I'm Sharon Johnson. My favorite car that I've owned is a 1989 Eclipse. And the favorite car that I've ever driven is my brother's Aston Martin.
What?
Yes, we took it on the highway. I went over 100 miles an hour.
Get out of town.
Awesome.
Fast. Get out of town fastly. That is amazing.
It was so much fun.
What does it feel like to drive an Aston Martin at 100 miles an hour?
Well, terrifying for me because I'm not used to driving that fast and it wasn't my car. So I wanted to make sure that nothing happened to it.
Be a little careful.
That's right. But other than that, it was exhilarating.
That is amazing. I'm trying to think of the fanciest car I've ever been in, but I can't right now. But maybe we'll be able to find it. I certainly hope that where you are, you're finding joy wherever you can, whether it's in an Aston Martin going 100 miles an hour or in your little Kia Niro driving past the gas station going, never have to be there again. Hopefully, you are also finding joy listening to us. Today, we have a really cool guest stopping by.
We've talked a little bit about Cars of Remington Steele before, but we wanted to take a closer look.
So I called my friend, Evan Ball, who is a TV writer and producer, and he's a huge car guy. Evan loves cars and TV and movies, and the cars that are in TV and movies.
Evan was a writer on Stargirl and most recently on Colin in Black and White, the drama about Colin Kaepernick during his high school football years and how he became an activist.
All right. Welcome, Evan, to 80s TV Ladies. We're so happy to have you on the show.
Oh, I'm happy to be here. This is when you brought it up to me initially, I was like, oh yeah, cool. I'm excited about coming on your podcast. It'll be fun. Have a good little chat. And then coming in here and seeing that you have the entire setup, multiple microphones, multiple computers, sound engineer, producer, all the whole thing. This is a much more professional setup than I was prepared for. And still, I am pumped.
Well, we want to make you feel like you're coming to some place, that's pulling out the stops.
Yeah. Well,
just for you. Just for you. How are you doing? And what's your story, Evan?
Oh my goodness, my story. Well, you and I know each other because I worked with your husband, Rich, on the show called Titans, a show that was originally on DC Universe that's now HBO Max. And we got along very, very well there and have since done many a movie screening and hangout and all that. And that's where I got to know you. And it's been absolutely fantastic. And I initially wanted to only write feature-length screenplays, and it wasn't until I was in school that I realized that TV was super fun. And I think as our discussion may prove, it's a really interesting way to explore characters and dynamics in depth over a long time. Movies are great to kind of hit a key point or tell a concise story, but you only have 2 hours. But with television, you have anywhere from 6 to 22 hours, which is probably too much for a season of television. But a lot of these 80 shows lean into that. So we get to have some fun there. And it allows you to really, really deep dive and explore and play with theme in ways that I think you don't get to as much in movies. So I'm a wholehearted TV lover now. And then I worked on Colin in Black and White, the Colin Kaepernick show on Netflix. Then I worked in a couple, you do mini rooms and things that kind of don't go anywhere. I'm learning that there's a lot of that.
There's a lot of streaming rooms like that.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Let's talk about the favorite car you've ever owned or currently own.
Ooh, ever. Okay, well, currently and ever. This may fit in with this podcast. I have a 1987 Mazda RX7 that I have owned for about 20 years now, and it barely runs. And I'm throwing way more money at that car than it's worth. Like I said, I bought it for $400. I could probably sell it right now without an engine for, I don't know, let's say $6,000, because it's a niche market now. There's a lot of people who are into it. But I probably have at least $25,000 invested in it, and it still doesn't run. So this is the project of my life. But it's straight out of the 80s, like all the shows you guys talk about.
What is it about this car that makes it your favorite? What is it that speaks to you about this car?
Okay, well, there's two things. One, I'm a big fan of the Mazda rotary engines, and that's like a unique thing that they do. It's kind of a small, high revving engine that you could kind of get a lot of power for a small engine, but it's a quirky thing, and I think I like the quirk of it. But the main thing too is that when I got it, and I got in a little bit over my head. I didn't have the money. I couldn't figure out how to do it. And during my time of production and all that, there were a lot of times where I was struggling to pay rent, and I was trying to figure out what to do, and it kept coming up. Okay, do I sell this car? Do I sell this car? And I never wanted to do it, because I was like, if I sell this car right now to pay this month's rent, and then next month I'm struggling for rent money, I'm just going to be mad at myself that I gave up on this thing that I've been wanting to do this whole time. So I promised that, when I quote unquote made it, I was going to restore this car to like the max capacity. And so I've really kept it with me as kind of a symbol of, I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there. And it's kind of come along with me as I've moved different places and tried to make this career happen. And now that it's finally unfolding and my career is working the way I want it to, and it's progressing, I'm like, yep, now it's time to treat the car and fulfill that promise to myself. So it's very sentimental.
Oh my God, that is so beautiful. It's like the car is a metaphor. My favorite thing for television
a
shows.
Very physical metaphor. Yes.
It is a special, it's a symbol,
yeah.
Right? The symbol of the struggle.
Mm-hmm.
The struggle is real.
It is. And it looks like you can see the struggle all over the car.
And I love that it's from the 80s.
Yes. Just like me.
In the 80s, cars and vehicles were one of the special effects.
Yeah.
Right? And if you were going to, be cool, you wanted to flip a car, burn a car, I don't know, throw
you have to
a car.
highlight a car. Your car has to talk. It's got to be super cool, something like that. You got to have the rolling, sexy car shots. It was definitely a big thing. I mean, it's weird because I was born in the 80s, and even my parents were surprised that I was so much of a Miami Vice fan throughout my life, because I remember it from when it was first aired. And I mean, not when it was first aired, it was probably in syndication, but I remember it from when I was very, very, very young. And they could never understand. They're like, you weren't really paying it. How did you know? You were literally 2-3 years old or whatever. And I just remember the Testarossa. I just loved the Testarossa. And so for the rest of my life, it brought me back to Miami Vice. And so, I mean, now I've watched the whole series so many times. But things like that, Knight Rider, for example, with Kit, the Trans Am, that was something that got me as a kid as well. And it was like, okay, cool. Yeah. The guy with the talking car. I want to watch that show. Cars, that era specifically, A-Team stuff where they had, the big A-Team vehicle, everybody's in and out. It's supposed to be utility, but there was something about that era that was really highlighting the cars in a really cool way. And, it just spoke to me.
I totally get that. I mean, because I was a total A-Team fan, a little bit older than you, but that's okay. But also Hardcastle McCormick. I love that friggin' car that apparently was like paper. They just could not keep that car together.
Oh, wow.
The car in Hardcastle. Do you know the car in Hardcastle McCormick?
No.
It was this like race car. Like he's a race car driver, right? So a retired judge teams up with a convicted ex-race car driver who's been repossessing cars and gone to jail for that, because sometimes it's always not legit. And so the judge is going to basically track down people who got out of his courtroom on a technicality, and he's going to get them on a new crime so he can send them to jail because they're bad people.
The premise of that show sounds so Reagan war on crime like era. so much of it, when you think about the pairing between cars and detectives,
yes,
was very leaning into we gotta stop these people at all costs, and we're gonna look cool while we do it. Yay, police in all ways.
Yes, and I will be my own justice.
Yes, exactly.
Because I am an old white man.
I could go vigilante with it. That's perfectly acceptable as long as I get the guy who did the minor crime, whatever.
You would love the car stuff, though.
Oh yeah,
I think it was the first TV show to do the under the truck.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty impressive.
That's amazing to do that practically and at that time. And if this car was built like paper, like you're saying, that is incredibly dangerous because they should be having full heavy roll cages in them.
I am blanking on the star of the show who I love dearly. He's great.
The judge or the
judge?
Brian Keith.
Brian Keith is fantastic in that show. Brian Keith is fantastic in that show.
I have to watch this.
You have to watch this show. It's great. And he hated that car because he had to, the doors, it was a race car.
He's a big guy.
You had to climb in.
Mm-hmm.
You had to climb in. He's a big dude. And he was 70 when he did the show.
And he had to do that every time?
Every time they jumped in the car to race after the bad guys.
Oh, man.
That is literally the show that Rich and I were watching during pandemic, in the early days of pandemic, when we were watching 70s and 80s shows that I was loving so much, but I was also mystified. I love Stephen Cannell shows of the 80s, the A-Team, Hardcastle McCormick, Riptide.
Oh, Riptide.
There are no women in those shows. There are women that start off in those shows, a few little side characters, and by the end of the first season, they're gone. They've packed up and moved to help their sister, or they're just kicked out of the van because George Papard didn't want to hang out with them. I don't know. And I was like, why could he not have cool women in these shows? It was make me sad because I love these shows, but there are no women in those shows.
There's something about the detective car thing that is just, you realize you're just watching masculine fantasy over and over and over again.
But then along comes Remington Steele and Laura Holt and her cars, because I realized when I was sort of prepping this, I'm like, oh my gosh, all the cars in the show that are, part of the lore of the show, not the one-off guest star cars, belong to Laura Holt.
Oh, they were all her personal cars.
Well, they were all her personal or business cars. So because she owned the agency, the cars belonged to her.
Yeah, that makes, I guess that's not something that you would have to put together, but that's perfect. Yeah, that's great.
I got very excited because I was like, I think it's the only one that I know of.
I can't think of another
I can't think
one.
of anything else.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Cagney and Lacey, they had their own police cars, but they belonged to the police department.
Right.
Yeah, they weren't hers. Her character's property, her business.
So should we talk about the cars in Remington Steele? Because they're kind of characters. They're kind of, their definitely story points to them, and they're a little bit character defining, at least, I would say.
Yeah. It was, speaking of which, it was really funny when I was rewatching because it's kind of hard to stream right now. So I had to go through, we'll say, some gray area channels
methods
to try to get to stream it. And so where I was watching the episodes to kind of avoid copyright issues, the whole episode was mirrored. So I'm watching these episodes and I'm like, why is everybody driving on the right side? And it took me a second. I'm like, oh, it's because they're flipping the screen. Funny thing.
That is so funny. And that goes in and out. There's some places you can see season 1 and 2, but none of the others.
Yeah. And it's never consistent. It's like some whatever network or streaming platform will have it for a short amount of time. And so if you try to get watching and you don't just burn through it really fast, next thing you know, it's gone and off of that platform. And now you're just like, okay, I have to find it somewhere else again.
Well, because we especially since we've gotten so used to everything being available somewhere, and that is just not the case with all of those shows, especially from the 80s and the 70s to a certain extent. But I did find all the seasons of Remington Steele on DVD. Yes, I still have a DVD player at the library.
Oh, that makes sense. It hits all the things that I love about this type of the genre, right? It has a really fun comedy to it and like really like a very specific kind of clever wit that you feel like you're always on the inside joke as an audience member that I just really appreciate because, you know, they're whether they're like double entendre style dialogue or the things that aren't as corny as James Bond, but they're like adjacent in some ways. Like you can see how Pierce got a lot of practice at delivering these kind of lines before he becomes Bond. But then also in the initial watch, just being like, oh yeah, there's some cool cars in this. Like this is a legit detective spy thing in the way that I was telling you, I was drawn to those types of stories before, like when we were talking about the other 80 shows.
Yeah. And again, it's not flashy like, you know, like the A-Team or Hardcastle McCormick or the Knight Rider. It's more subtle. But what I liked, so the car that Laura Holt, her personal car, right? I looked it up because I wouldn't know from the outside because I'm not a car person. But basically, it was a Volkswagen Rabbit Convertible, which is not, again, a sexy car, right? It was a fun car. It's a fun car.
The Rabbit's kind of legendary.
Is it?
Yeah, it has like a low-key cult status.
Okay.
Because the Volkswagen Rabbits were something that at the time were that kind of affordable, sporty coupe thing, right? And so it was something that just like a lot of people could get their hands on and have fun with. They were like beach cars and they were things to like cruise around on the highway with and have a good time. So it's weird. Volkswagen always has a kind of like diehard group of people who are just like fans forever and know everything in and out and all that. But yeah, if you look at from old Beetles to Rabbits to what was the other car?
The vans,
like, the buses, the Volkswagen buses. Like I think it's in there. It's not quite as esteemed as those two, but there's definitely a whole Rabbit fan base out there.
A whole Rabbit fan base. I'm excited. Yeah. I wouldn't know that either. What I will say that we learned from Stephanie Zimbalist, Laura Holt, when we interviewed her, the car was what she was driving. They just basically said, oh, that looks cool. Laura Holt would be driving that car. I don't know if it was her personal car because they do trash it a lot, particularly, I think, in season one. I'm sure at some
point it was just like, okay, we got to get a car for the show, like a show car. Yeah.
But I liked that it felt like it defined Laura Holt's character in a way, in a specific way that was very Los Angeles. And that was one of the things in rewatching the show that I realized like, oh, this is like it's super LA. It's super LA and it's so exciting.
And it felt kind of cool, like a cool little car for Los Angeles. It didn't, it wasn't just a sedan. It was cool, but not flashy, if you will. Yeah. It wasn't like some convertible sports car-y kind of thing. It felt, and maybe it just felt like her. Maybe it just felt like Laura. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think so too. It's not Magnum PI. We're not going Ferrari. Yeah. We're going like a very practical car and yet sporty and cool.
So I do have a little thought on that. And this is me probably putting things together that didn't exist. But the show is very clearly a fan of a lot of film noir. And those pieces constantly referencing Bogart movies and stuff like that. And if you look at a lot of the film noir movies set in the 40s and things like that, there's a ton of convertibles. There are a ton of just like mellow convertible sedans that are just around because that was like the thing to have. And so it actually makes sense to me that she drives around in like the 80s-ish version of something like that. That's not the sportiest of the sports car, but is just sporty enough that you're like, yeah, a detective would drive that.
Now that you talk about that, I'm thinking of like, what's the Cary Grant movie with the plane?
North by Northwest.
North by Northwest. He drives. He gets drunk in the convertible. They send him trying to send him off the road in the convertible. I'm like, oh, you're right.
I mean, maybe a happy accident, but it was one of those. It's one of those things. It's like, oh, that's cool.
It's also easy to film with the convertible. You can see a character.
Much easier.
Much easier. I love that. Okay, I think we have to take a little break, and then we're going to come back and talk about what I think are the two other very important cars in the show. But then I also realized in the pilot, there's a whole car story. We'll come right back. And we're back. We kept talking about cars and television shows during the break. We didn't stop.
No.
There's so many cars and television shows to talk about. But Remington Steele and Remington Steele.
But you had a
cars.
thought. What was your thought?
I did have a thought because we were talking about that, and I was thinking about how, even growing up as a kid, how many shows where there was always an iconic car, right? There's always the Batmobile. There was like the turtle van. Like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had a turtle van, and I had to get the little turtle van toy with the figures because that was a thing. And just thinking about how instrumental, even X-Men, like the X-Men cartoon, they didn't have a car until the movie when they drove a Mazda RX-8 and X-Men 2. But they had the SR-71 Blackbird, which was their thing. So there's always the iconic vehicle. Yeah.
Yes, I was thinking about that because I was like, I'm sort of now then leap back to like, okay, what other women and cars and women female driven television shows did the ladies get to have a cool car?
Mm-hmm.
Wonder Woman? I don't think she had a car, but she had the plane.
She had the plane.
She had the jet.
The invisible plane.
And they did it in the show, and I couldn't remember how they did it, and so I had to go look up how they did it, and it basically looks like a glass plane.
Sounds
but
right.
It's pretty freaking cool for 70s.
Heck yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, that was cool.
It's also a random thing. So you have a character who can fly, but who travels around in an invisible jet, and it's not. There's nothing about Themyscira that makes you think military jet. But she flies around in a military jet, and it's super cool.
It is super cool. And it's invisible, which always felt weird because you're like, okay,
she's not invisible. Just the plane.
That's the thing.
It's not a cloaking device. It's just see-through. So there's just a person sitting there flying through the air.
I mean, maybe it wouldn't be picked up on radar because people might not be picked up. I don't know how radar works, but it is weird. It would just freak you out. Like if you're another plane and you just
see a person? That would be very strange.
I'm still at a loss as to how she got away with that, but it's still very cool.
It's still very cool. But did Wonder Woman have a car? Does she have
Not that I know of.
Nothing comes to mind.
There had to be several cars on the show, but maybe there was no one car.
Well, but how does the car compare or compete with the invisible plane? I mean, if in the show, you can't.
Can you have an invisible car? I mean, like, that's where I'm going. Like, and then she's just cruising down the street, just sitting. What was interesting to me is if Pierce Brosnan had never walked into the show, the character of Remington Steele would have been represented by that limo.
Ooh, interesting.
That's probably what happened before Pierce Brosnan as Remington Steele showed up in Laura's life, that this car was there, it existed, and people just sort of represented him.
She basically got a limo, put R. Steele on the license plate, and had Fred, the chauffeur, drive that car around. So people thought Remington Steele existed. That gag was going on before Pierce Brosnan walks into the show.
Oh, yeah. It's such a fun concept. Like the concept of the show being they're not going to take a woman seriously, so we got to create this. And it's funny because the idea of Remington Steele being like the ultra masculine man, and then Pierce Brosnan being not unmasculine, he's very masculine, but he's the British, he's like the charming, pretty gentleman type, right? And it's like when you think of what Remington Steele, I think was kind of parodying in the concept she made up of him, it's the other things I was talking about, right? It's like it's the bullet type characters. It's those things you're like, oh yeah, it's going to be this like man's man type of guy that's probably wealthy, that's glamorous.
The heart to heart guy.
Yeah.
It's the heart. It's Heart. Mr. Hart.
And then to bring in a guy who in his character in the show is a criminal who's like suave, but who doesn't.
He's a con man.
Yeah. Like it was such a fun way to kind of subvert that.
Yeah. I thought it was great. And yet he sort of slides into that character and obviously makes it his own. But it's interesting that he fits, he both fits and then is the opposite of everything she wanted that character to be.
Yeah.
I'm going to invent the perfect man to be the head of my agency. And he's perfect because he doesn't exist.
He listens to me. He takes me seriously. He lets me take the lead on things, all that. And then like, oh, here's the actual guy. Now we have some friction.
Yeah.
And there's a show.
And then there's a show. That is so funny. So the limo was a 1976 Cadillac Fleetwood.
Ooh.
Do you know what that means?
I know people idolize the Fleetwoods as being like an iconic thing of the time. For limos, but I'm not up on limos.
Not up on limos. The limo doesn't do a lot of stunts. They do a lot of following people and traveling, Remington from place to place, and Laura and Remington.
Talking in it.
Yeah. Figuring things out, having romantic moments. But they don't flip that limo, but they do flip her rabbit. They drive her rabbit into a lake in season 1. And then the rabbit gets like pushed down a hill and rolls.
Tumbles.
I don't know that they ever completely destroy it. I mean, they clearly destroy it in those. I mean, there's several, versions of it.
Yeah, I don't think it ever got that badly damaged.
It's not like the big full explosion thing where you're just like, this car is done.
Yeah, no,
definitely not.
Not like Scarecrow, Mrs. King when they blew up.
Yeah, to a large extent, Remington Steele wasn't a let's blow things up kind of show. It happened occasionally, but it wasn't a big part of the show, and happily they left her car alone for the most part.
Yes. And so we were talking about in the pilot.
Yes.
That I was reminded when I went back and looked at the pilot that the pilot is all about a car. It's about jewels and a car. And that was really interesting because I had forgotten. And it's about like Remington Steele Agency has been hired to protect some very expensive jewels, which are going to be part of the revelation of this brand new fancy car. And then things go awry, as they do in a pilot.
And Remington Steele, or whatever his name is, really.
Yeah, Remington Steele in the pilot doesn't exist as a person. He is a fake made up person.
Yeah.
That's the fake boss.
And this fake Remington Steele is trying to steal the jewels and inserts himself into this whole process. And
yeah, it's so fascinating. I mean, they're really clever in the way they kind of unfold it when he meets Laura and he's pretending to be like the South African agent, right? And so he folds into that, but then he goes somewhere else and he's trying to work with the other people who are coming after the gems, and he's pretending to be someone else. And then finally the person who doesn't trust Laura because he's the guy who's like, I got to see a man, walks in and is like, Remington Steele has to be here or I'm walking away from the case. And because it's a pilot, they got to figure something out, shenanigans. And then next thing you know, he's just there like, hi, nice to meet you. I'm Mr. Steele. And you're just like, whoa, wait, what happened?
It's so great. It really is. The
handoff is so good over and over.
Really fun. And she has to go with it. And then ultimately realizes that the success of her agency has hit a point where she needs a Remington Steele. She can't pull off the ghost game anymore. It can't just be the limo, our Steele. And so they sort of have to. But we have talked about the fact that even though that's the coolest idea for a pilot, it is actually the thing that probably ruins the female-driven aspect of the show.
It definitely changes the nature of, but it also shines a light on what women then, and even now today, have to go through, that there's always a man who's going to be there to try to, or people are going to listen to because it's a guy and it's not a woman. I've certainly lived through some of that myself. I think you probably have too. And sadly, it's happened then, and it's still happening today for a certain extent.
They actually talked about it, the women that worked in the Obama White House, in the administration, because there were a lot of women. He hired a lot of women. He hired a lot of people of color. But the women in particular realized that they were literally not being listened to. And so they offsite went, we got to do something. And they started like going, well, she has a really interesting point. And they were literally then backing each other up in their meetings to make sure that they were being heard and that then their ideas weren't being taken by a guy in the room. And it's the Obama White House. You're like, oh, well, that should be the friendliest female, it wasn't.
It's just still culturally ingrained blind spots. Mm-hmm. It's so bad. And back to the show, the thing that I hear your point about it, right? By having a physical, actual Remington Steele, you are conceding the idea that you need this man to be there when it was just her own ship. And the show does a really good job, I think, of going back and forth and highlighting how capable she is at this, and not letting it just be, oh, Mr. Steele, Pierce Brosnan, can just kind of charm his way through everything and get everything done. Like, she has to do a lot of the legwork all the time to figure these things out. And, he has his skills too. And that's the kind of fun back and forth of it. But I'm happy, at least, and this is the lowest possible bar, that they didn't just abandon that and let it just be like, oh, well, now he's the lead detective and she's actually kind of the secretary, right? Like, it's not that.
No, and you're right. And it teetered every once. Having watched it, you're like, oh no, okay, all right. And then that's I think a testament to both the creators, because they listened, but also, I think to Stephanie Zimbalist, who, in researching sort of the season 1 to season 2 and sort of some of the rumors of they're not getting along, his star, he was going to become James Bond, which is always challenging when, you have then 2 stars and one has just become the most famous star that's shooting up into the sky and everybody loves. But she was also in season 2. There's interviews with her in like TV Guide and things like that. She was just saying, please remember the premise of the show. Point of the show is that Laura is driving this ship.
Is the detective.
The detective. And so she really, in season 2, worked to write that ship. And they were like, oh, you're right. They were able to hear it and see it. And then they started bringing more women writers on, and Robin Bernheim. But they talked about that, like that it was important to stay true to that, because that was the concept of the show. And it was, even if it wasn't like they weren't going, we're making a feminist show. They were like, we're making entertainment, but we're doing so with a female character like you've not seen before. And I think they cast right, because it was somebody who fought for that vision. That was the show. But we're a little off of cars. The concept car in the first show.
Yeah.
In the first episode, I'm going to tell you what the car was. In the show, it's called the Hunter Jetstar 6000. That's a pretty good name. It was actually the Vector W2. Do you know this?
No, I didn't know that.
Manufactured by Vector Aeromotive as a concept car in 1978. It went into limited production in the early 80s.
Yeah, never.
But the company ceased production on all its car models in the mid 90s.
Okay.
And then, of course, spoiler alert, the businessman is doing this to basically, he's made a plan to steal the diamonds to save his car company and fund his car. And weirdly enough, this pilot aired October 1st, 1982, October 19th. We just looked up 1982. John DeLorean, famous car manufacturer, was arrested for allegedly trying to buy large amounts of cocaine in order to finance his struggling car company. Now, Evan, do you know about the DeLorean?
Wild. Yeah, so the DeLorean, as being, if not one of the most iconic cars in screen history, right? And from the car guy's side of things, it's a vehicle that has such a mythology about it. Everybody loves the specific DeLorean vehicle, but it has like different myths and ideas about like what happened to the company. Cause with the owner falling into legal issue after legal issue after legal issue, there's always the like, oh, well, some other company is going to scoop them up or something else is going to happen. Like, this is too hot of a property and too unique of a car that today is still really heavily sought out. But nobody really knows why there can't be anything else coming from it, right? There's nobody else bought the property. The cars are super hard to find. They're very well maintained for the most part. But it's just shrouded in mystery. And it's like, I think that adds to the appeal, the fact that the owner's having so much drama.
Yeah. We were talking about Hardcastle McCormick and the race car that they use in the show, because it wasn't holding together very well. In like season 2 or 3, they basically just converted some DeLoreans to look like the car. And they used that for jumping because it was a better car.
It's a tank. I mean, it's a stainless steel vehicle. Like back in the day, in the 80s, people were still making cars out of metal, but you know, they were painted and all that. And this was very specifically, it's just like, this is raw stainless. It maybe had a clear coat on it. I don't actually know if that's true, but it's a very unique, specific vehicle that was heavy, that was almost bulletproof. So I could totally see them being like, yeah, sure, let's use it as a stunt car for something else. But then as a fan today who knows there's such a very limited amount of them, and that if I ever see one, it's like I have to stop and take a picture and like, okay, so there's one in this neighborhood, and now we know that there's another one in California that exists and all that. It just breaks my heart to hear that they were just throwing it off of bridges and
zoom
doing
over
all kinds of things with it.
Like flying it into the air and landing really hard.
One can only hope that it ended up in the hands of somebody who's given it a lot of TLC and taken very good care of it.
That would be lovely. You know, but they threw those cars around in the 80s real hard.
Yeah, because you have to do things practical. I mean, if there's anything I miss now, but I understand safety concerns and all that when it comes to doing stunts and all that. Being able to have a practical car chase scene with real stunt drivers and real cars just feels completely different than anything else. It's so much more fun.
All right. So the other big car, they basically bring a special car in the middle of Remington Steele, season 2, episode 7. It's called Love Among the Steele. And it introduces the car they will basically use for the rest of the show for reasons.
It was cool. I think that was probably
that's why. Do you remember what the car is?
No, I don't.
It's the 1936 Auburn Boattail Speedster.
Oh.
Do you remember this? Do you remember that when it came in the show? It was this whole episode about it where the agency is hired to find a missing car that holds the key to something precious or special. And yet also it's a car that keeps showing up driverless and trying to run them down.
It's like a ghost car.
It's like a ghost car.
And she's like, I'll take that.
Well, it's so funny because in it, like, there's also this legend that has to do with like romance and the car. And if you know, they tracking down all the owners of the car and the mystery of if you're involved with the car, then love is in the air and something fabulous, you know. Anyway, there's a sort of, every past owner has a personal and romantic connection to that car. And then somehow at the end of the day, the Remington Steele agency ends up with it, or Pierce Brosnan's character, Remington Steele. But I'm assuming the Remington Steele agency bought it for him.
Yeah. I mean, where else he doesn't have money?
He doesn't have any money anywhere else.
I'm often like, where does he really live?
I mean, the agency pays for his apartment. The agency pays for his car.
Like, if all this is gone, he's just bouncing around. Because he talks about it in the pilot when he's like, "Oh yeah, I may follow the gems to San Francisco or whatever." Like whatever tour they're on. And it's like, do you have a home to go to, or do you just go from job to job?
That's the whole point of the character. That's the mystery and heartbreak of the character. Is he's a con man without a home and without a place, and then he finds Laura, and then he becomes, you know, he has to live up to the perfect man, and you know, in order to win over Laura Holt. That's what you got to do out in the world.
That is way more detailed and a much more severe endeavor than swipe right.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
But there was something you said earlier about film noir and cars of that era that made me realize, or made me think, that maybe that had something to do with maybe how that car got in the show, because it's very much of that film noir
era, right? For
of
sure.
that era, and it feels very much. And so all the film references and all the other that they constantly do, this feels perfect for this show. I don't know that it would feel right in almost any other show, but because of that, it feels really right for this show.
Oh, there's somebody out there who's like, oh yeah, that was in, you know, scene 19 in The Big Sleep and blah, 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 blah right now, that we're like, we don't have that. And I'm kind of upset that I don't know if there's that connection there, but it feels like the kind of car that would have that.
That would have that. And I did a little bit of a dive, but maybe one of our listeners knows, and you can let us know. But I was really curious about like other women and female driven shows or movies that get to drive cool vehicles. And I wasn't sure if we talked about Wonder Woman, but I wasn't sure if there's something else. You're like, oh, this one.
Well, not in so in comics, Black Canary is a DC character, and she's like known for having a motorcycle, and that's her thing. So it's not a car.
No, that's okay.
But
Vehicle's cool.
she's got it. She has an iconic kind of. It goes back and forth. It's mostly like Harley-ish, but not like a big handlebar thing. But she's a biker girl, and so she does the biker thing.
No, that's cool.
So that's pretty cool. I'm trying to think of, in the Fast and Furious movies. At different times, the female characters have specific cars, but now that I think about it, I can't track that there's, in the way that Dominic Toretto, Vin Diesel's character, always drives a Charger. I don't know that there's a female character that always drives this specific thing in that.
So Michelle Rodriguez, do you know? She's in the Fast and Furious. So what does she drive?
She goes back and forth. So in the first one, I think she drives a Nissan 240 SX, and then later, because her character and Vin Diesel's character become like an item, she starts adopting some of his, and she drives a lot of his style cars. She drives like a Hemi Cuda at some point and other things. But then later she moves into being a motorcycle girl too. And she's on motorcycles. You'll see everybody else in a car, and you'll see her on a bike just dipping off ahead of them. That
might be Debbie Evans Levitt, quite honestly. So, just saying.
I was just thinking, Thelma and Louise. That iconic convertible. Sure. I have no idea what it is. But
Thelma and Louise. That's a great one.
But that's the only one I can come up with at this point. I can't think of any other movie or TV show that has a car that's that tied to the show, tied to the female characters in the same way.
There is a friend of mine that I was talking to that we were talking about Thelma and Louise, and it's one of my favorite things that I probably remember forever, where we were talking about Thelma and Louise and how great it was, and then she's like, "Well, my favorite part was just when they flew off at the end."
Okay. That's your takeaway from Thelma and Louise.
And I was like, oh yeah, that was good. Cause I just couldn't, I'm like, that's what she thinks happened. And cause that's what she wants to have happened. They flew off just in the car.
Flew into the sunset.
They flew into the sunset. And God bless her. Why not?
Well, if that's what she wants to believe and take away, then okay.
So of course I did a little research, because I was like, okay, we got to figure out. We looked at Scarecrow Miss Kane. We talked about Lee Stetson drives a Porsche 356 and an 84 Corvette. Amanda King drives this LTD station wagon, and it's very iconic. I remember that. Like, I remember that look of a station wagon from the 70s and 80s. My mom had a green station wagon. That's what we rolled around the back without seatbelts, like hanging out.
Station wagon kind of defined the era between muscle car and like the Japanese invasion of the 80s. It was just these station wagons.
Because, man, they were tanks. And I had a 1980 Toyota Corolla wagon, station wagon.
Wow.
In my last 2 years of college and first couple years of grad school. And I love that thing. I was so embarrassed when I got it because I needed a car and I couldn't afford much. This was what I could afford, and I needed room because I was in film school. And I was like, okay, it was such a great car.
I'll say it was probably you were everybody's friend. You could carry everything. It was so easy to get with people.
So many C-stands into that car. Yeah. I couldn't believe it. I could pack that car with everything. It had this high wheelbase, I think is what they call it. So literally we took it out to the desert. We were off-roading with that thing. It was fantastic, that car. It had these little rain guards, which I've never seen. I'm sure
metal ones over the windows, the little gutters.
Ones over the like. So when you could roll down the windows during a rain and it wouldn't come into the car.
Wow!
It was stolen twice from USC.
But you got it back?
I got it back the first time. It just had like clearly joyridden, and they like took the battery or something.
Sure.
I'm like, okay. The second time it was gone for like 10 days. And finally I called my mom and I'm like, told her that the car had been stolen. It was the worst. Like I just couldn't I didn't even know how to tell her. And the next day they called me and they said, your car is down in Long Beach next to the harbor. It's in a storage place. You got to pick it up by 5 or
What?
or they're going to charge you another $60 a day, which they've been charging you. And I was like, oh no. And then I get down there and it had been stripped.
Oh,
No.
They had taken the luggage rack on the top of the car. They had taken the rain guards. They had taken literally pieces of a 1980 Corolla wagon in order to fix a 1980 Toyota Corolla wagon somewhere else. And they left us, but it was still drivable. I had to get another battery. It had wheels, but I had to get the battery before they closed at 5, or I was going to be charged
for another day.
Or your
For my stolen car.
Oh my God.
Heartbreak upon heartbreak of Los Angeles.
Jeez.
Good Lord. Anyway, I did get it out, but that car lasted for 250,000 miles. I sold it to a friend of mine after I moved on from it, and she drove it back to Georgia and drove it until it was in the ground.
Wow.
Greatest car I've ever owned. And no offense to my Kia Niro, which is fabulous. I love her.
Say, but that was why the Japanese cars dominated the 80s, was because suddenly they're cheaper and way more reliable. You're getting 200,000 miles out of them without a sweat, with just minor maintenance. And it's like, American companies like, wait, what now?
Got great gas mileage for the time.
Yep.
It was amazing. All right. So I also looked up Cagney and Lacey. They drive basically their sort of police car, I don't know, the sedans. According to Internet Movie Car Database, it's the Cashmere Dodge Diplomat 4-door sedan that they're mostly driving. They do a lot of car stuff in Cagney and Lacey.
Cagney and Lacey, for sure.
Yeah. It's fun. It's very realistic. It's not, crazy. They're not getting goofy with their car chases. Although in the TV movie, there's a great gag, the very beginning of the TV movie, where she's driving and Lacey is driving and sees a guy running out an apartment with a bag. He's clearly stolen something out of that building. So she pulls over and starts chasing him, right? And then she has to get out of the car and start chasing him. And he dodges into an apartment building. And so she jumps out of her car, tries to get the door before it closes behind him, but doesn't make it. And then has to start buzzing New York City apartments in order to get somebody to buzz her in order to chase this guy. And she's trying to do that. And meanwhile, some other guy on the street jumps into her police car and steals it. It's such a great gag. It's really, I thought it was a lovely introduction to that character and the world. It was just really wonderful.
That's awesome.
All right. So Charlie's Angels. Do they have cool cars in Charlie's Angels? Do you know? Did you ever watch?
No, I never caught up on. We had Charlie's Angels. I remember when the Cameron Diaz movies came out, that being a thing. But that was, that was chasing the whole like kung fu wire combat thing. Like that was just a different era.
It was a different era
than the old school Charlie's Angels. Tell me about it. I want to hear it now.
So the only thing I remember is that Farrah Fawcett, the Farrah Fawcett character, I think had a cool car, but they didn't do a lot of showing up. I don't remember.
They did a lot of undercover work.
Oh, yeah. Melissa's giving us a nod. Okay. They had 3 cool cars. Okay. So Melissa's not on mic. So one of them drove a Mustang because we gave her mic to Evan. So the Angels got some cars. That's cool.
Good. They should.
I was like, and then Heart to Heart. I think Stephanie Powers. They were mostly driven around by Max in I don't know what that car was, but Stephanie Powers gets to drive around in a Mercedes SL 450.
Mm-hmm.
That seems about right.
Yeah, they're rich, so I would hope she'd be driving something like
that.
And
it's a convertible, I think.
Well, it's also it's got a good engine and some good giddy up in that. So if you needed to get somewhere with that one and still kind of have a big tank in front of you, that's the way to go.
Well, all right. We should get Stephanie Powers on the show. Don't you think? Add her to the list. Okay. I was like, well, what about Murder, She Wrote and Jessica Fletcher? So I went and looked her up because I was like, okay, what is she driving? Columbo car, right? Here's the gag. Jessica Fletcher didn't drive in Murder, She Wrote. She always took a bike, a cab, a train, or caught a ride with somebody to get where she was going to solve the crime. And Angela Lansbury told the LA Times she liked it because it precluded the need for car chases.
Well, there you go. Cut out the most interesting part of anything it's in.
Any detective show.
No, I mean, Murder, She Wrote was fantastic, but I couldn't imagine
Isn't that
Angela
interesting?
Lansbury in like a high-speed car chase.
No, not at all.
No, because she's like Columboing it. Did
Yeah,
Columbo have a car? He had just a bad car. He had just a bad car.
For some reason, I don't know anything specific, but I think jalopy when I think of Columbo, but maybe that's because of how he was dressed. It was not exactly, a suave dresser like our Remington Steele.
No, that was Columbo was very much the anti-Remington Steele a little bit.
At least in all ways, actually.
Yeah.
Because Columbo was a good detective. He didn't necessarily rest as well as Remington Steele did.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't he drive a car as rather nondescript, unlike Remington Steele,
So do you know what that car is, Evan?
Yeah, I mean,
So this is Charlie's Angels and Farrah Fawcett's.
Farrah Fawcett's car looks like it's is that a Shelby? I can't tell if it's a Ford Mustang Cobra, it looks like, which is a hell of a car. I mean, especially you're talking about the era. That's really cool. I'm seeing different pictures though, because I'm seeing both a hardtop and a convertible, but I don't know if that's the later one. Okay. No, it's good because I'm a fan of the hardtops. As someone who enjoys racing, you want the hardtop. You want the rigidity it gives you and all that. So when I see, if I'm casting cars for various characters, right, I'm judging based on like how they operate, what they do, what their interests are and all that. And like some characters, you want a hardtop because they're going to drive it off a cliff. And that like they assume that when they're in the car, that's their skill to outmaneuver the other person. And some people are like, I need people to see me. I need to look good when I do this. I need to, or it's a commuter car, whatever it is, right? You have different things. And I think hardtop versus convertible is a really important decision.
I think so too. For a brief moment in the late 90s, my boyfriend at the time and I we bought a Mustang convertible, an older Mustang convertible. And then when we broke up, we both agreed that he should take it because the goal was that he was going to fix it when we drove it around because it needs a lot of work. And so I was like, hey, John, you take that. But it was a brief fun moment when I lived in Venice and had a Mustang convertible.
That's perfect. I mean, Steve McQueen I want to say in the Thomas Crown Affair has the like beach buggy at the end, and that's the whole cool thing of it. And you get something like that, you're on the beach, like, yeah, you want a convertible, you want the sea air.
But it's so hard on your hair. I never understood the hair stuff. I don't know how you do any kind of long hair in a convertible.
I don't have that problem. I keep my hair pretty short.
You do see it's a lot of women in movies, I don't know about in real life, wearing some sort of scarf.
Oh yeah.
If they're in a convertible. So maybe that's how they deal with the hair thing. But I've always lived in the Valley since I've lived in Los Angeles, and I would not want a convertible. I would never be able to feel like I'd want to use it. Wouldn't want that.
No way.
Sun beating down on me, but the beach is perfect. Yeah. That's a great place to have a convertible.
It was fun. We thought we were cool for about 3 months. Then I went back to my practical cars. Also, tell us about your cars. What cars you have?
And then my other two cars, my 2006 RX-8 was kind of it was just my daily driver for a very long time. And then ultimately, as it was wearing out, I said, this is the car to beat up on the track. So that's what that's for. And that one is down right now as well. So you take that
to a racetrack and
yeah, I just do track days, fun stuff like that. Time attack stuff.
He just does track days.
Track days. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good time. No, there's always various groups that are renting out tracks for a day, or there's different events where you just get to go
and
get some tires and drive your ass off. Pardon my language.
Oh my God. So you go and actually race and drive fast.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not racing directly against other people. You know, it's not like there's a start line and we're chasing each other in that way, but you're trying to get the fastest lap you can. So while there will be other people on track, you know, if someone's on a hot lap, you're going to try to stay out of their way. And then when you're on your hot lap, they're going to try to stay out of your way. So you're racing the clock and you're being competitive against people on the timesheet.
All right. Good. Be safe.
Yes, please.
What's up? What are you working on now? What's coming next?
Oh, okay. So right now I am working on, I'm writing on season 2 of Mayor of Kingstown. It's a Paramount Plus show starring Jeremy Renner, created by Taylor Sheridan and Hugh Dillon. It's a show about, basically there's a town that we're playing. It's a fictional town in northern Michigan that there's 10 prisons within 12 square miles. And so the lead character of the show really has to negotiate between the people on the outside of the prison, the people on the inside, to kind of make sure that everything in the town's running smoothly. So it's a really fun show. It's very, if you like Sicario, if you like Wind River, if you like Yellowstone, like Taylor Sheridan's stuff, it's going to be right up your alley. It's a really cool show.
Diane Wiest is a very fabulous 80s TV lady who's also on Mayor of Kingstown, right?
Yes, she is. Diane Wiest is fascinating in that it's almost as though she knows she's a legend, like in her DNA, though. I'm not saying she acts any sort of way or that she's a diva. I think the opposite. In fact, she's very about her craft, and we would hear all the time questions she had or things she wanted to kind of dive deeper into for her character and things that she was interested in bringing, because she is a full-on professional, and I think it shows in everything she does. And if anything, the goal is always like, can we just give her more? Is there anything else we could do for her? Because she's almost too good to be true. She's incredible. One of my goals in my career was to be able to write on kind of high level premium cable / streaming crime shows. Again,
This
just
fits
like
everything.
Miami Vice, of course. And so, you know, it was really a thrill for me to be on this show, and our writer's room was fantastic.
All right, 3 questions.
So question number 1, what's the 80s ladies driven TV show that has resonated with you?
It's actually probably Remington Steele, because I came on to so many of these shows so late. And the ones that I did come on were very masculine based. Like I said, it was cars were my entryway into a lot of the 80s shows. But with James Bond being an entryway into Remington Steele, and to being like, oh, Laura Holt is really, really cool. And it playing into just my sensibilities for the detective genre and like a lot of the whodunit stuff. And especially with the way that I think it plays with comedy against all the other things that I've seen that they're not that funny. Like all the other shows I love, like I love Miami Vice. I will watch Miami Vice over and over again. It's not a super funny show. It has its little moments, but it's not a funny show. Whereas I feel like when you're watching Remington Steele, there's always like a little wink at you here and there. And there's all these little things that like keep it lighthearted and keep you on your toes that I really love.
That's fantastic. I think we kind of agree with all of that.
Yes. All right. Can you name any of your favorite current 21st century female-driven television shows? What are you watching now that it's led by women?
Ooh. Let's see. Well, Mayor of Easttown, which is not the show that I'm on now, Mayor of Kingstown, but Mayor of Easttown was fantastic. I really loved The Americans, which is not currently airing, but I rewatch a lot. And Kerry Russell,
she's
being
amazing.
lead of that, she was incredible.
Those are pretty good ones.
I mean, I was a huge Buffy fan, but that's like a whole different world.
Era.
And the Joss Whedon conversation. And
we are going to have Jane Espenson on the show.
That'll be fun.
Which will be really fun. But what's the most action hero kind of television moment, a moment where you went, is this scripted? Like how
can I fit this in my script? This is
or
great.
how can I put this in a script moment that you've had?
Oh, there's a few of those. One of them. Okay. So on topic, there was one time I was with my friends. We were leaving a car show, and it was late at night. We were driving down Highway 10. I mean, at this point, it must be 1:30-ish in the morning, and a car flies by us, and it's like an early 90s BMW 3 Series coupe. And everybody looks at it because those are cool cars. So we're just like, oh yeah, it's nice. It's weaving in and out of traffic. And everybody's just like, oh, this is going to be a problem. We need to ease up. And sure enough, it almost hits the guardrail in the middle of the freeway. And then to avoid that, swerves back into the road, tumbles over several times, immediately lights on fire as we're passing it. And it was just one of those things where like, that's not real. And it took us a moment to realize that it actually happened because we were all just kind of sitting there in shock as we're driving past it. And everyone's like, we should stop and help the guy, right? Like we need to do something about this. And as we look back, there's all these people getting out of their car that were behind that had stopped and helped. And so we kept going. We felt really bad about it, but we kept going. And it was just one of those like, I guess that happens. Like you don't really just see cars explode in front of you ever in real life. That's just not a thing. And a lot of car guys will say like it takes a lot to get in a circumstance like that. And it just went right up. It was crazy.
That's crazy. That's a good one. I mean, a bad one, but a good one.
A bad one, but I see it so visually. I just can never forget it. Just seeing the swerve past us hitting the brakes, goes toward the middle, almost has a crash there, comes back, rolls over. We're trying to swerve and avoid him. It's this whole slow motion thing. It was wild.
Wow. All right. That's that. Yeah. Yep. Yep. And there we go. We are going to wrap up. Thank you so much for being on. This has been so much fun.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I'm real. First of all, it was just an excuse to rewatch the show again, but also great catching up with you and just having a good time. I mean, I love what you guys are doing, and I am very excited to come back when your stunt woman is here.
Debbie Evans, love it.
Oh God, that'll be so cool.
Even if
I can't come back,
yes.
I'm happy to. I will be listening very closely to that one.
We will have you back on. We just want to have everybody on every week. We're going to have a convention of our guests because it's been so much fun to do this.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thank you. Today's audiography includes the website Internet Movie Cars Database, which I did not know existed until this week when I was researching cars.
Nor did I. I guess there must be an internet database for just about everything.
It is so great. You can look up by movie, a TV show, or by a car.
Wow.
That you want to see what it's been in. They've got an entire list of the cars that were in Remington Steele, and by episode. And sometimes they have a little picture. It's very exciting.
That's fantastic.
I was like, I could spend hours on that site. I also want to shout out that Colin in Black and White is available now on Netflix. Check it out. Okay, and because we are in favor of abortion rights, I'm going to shout out a book today, Reproductive Justice, an Introduction, written by Loretta J. Ross and Ricky Solinger. It's a great introduction to reproductive justice, which is important for us all.
It will really help us if you give us a shout out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the social medias. Let us know you're listening. And if you're liking the podcast, please rate and review us. It helps us out a lot.
And check out our website, 80stvladies.com, for more information on our show. Thank you guys so much for listening. You did great today. We want to wish you a happy new year, 2023. You know, it's been a long few years, and so we are hopeful that 2023 will be a new beginning for a lot of people, and healing time, and more joy and laughter. I think we need incredible, powerful joy and laughter experiences to heal us.
In community.
That's
what we're missing.
We hope 80s TV Ladies brings you joy and laughter and lots of fabulous new and old shows to watch, all of which will lead us forward toward being amazing ladies of the 21st century.